Okay, so long before we were all doom scrolling through Twitter or, swiping endlessly on TikTok, there was this chilling media theory from 1985 that basically predicted our entire digital dependency. It's wild. In this explainer, we're diving into the seminal work of Neil Postman. He warned us, straight up, that our massive, insatiable appetite for entertainment was going to fundamentally change everything: how we think, how we govern, and literally how we understand truth itself. Now, for decades, society was absolutely terrified of George Orwell's vision in 1984. You know the one, a totalitarian nightmare where the government controls us through fear, inflicts pain, bans books, and actively hides the truth. We were basically always looking over our shoulders for Big Brother. But Neil Postman argued we were actually sweating over the wrong nightmare. He pointed over to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. In that society, people aren't controlled by pain at all, they're controlled by pleasure. Think about it. In Huxley's world, nobody needs to ban a book because, well, nobody even wants to read one. And the truth, it isn't hidden by some malicious government. It's just drowned out, completely lost in a huge, unending sea of irrelevance. So Postman's core argument here was completely counterintuitive for the time, but he summarized it brilliantly. Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us, but Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. And that's exactly what's happening. We've actually grown to adore the very technologies that are slowly, quietly undoing our capacity to think deeply. Instead of fighting off some oppressive regime, we're willingly surrendering our autonomy, our maturity, our historical context, and for what? Just to be endlessly entertained. Right, so to understand exactly how we ended up here, we have to look under the hood, at the underlying machinery of our culture. It's not just about what we say. It's really about how we say it. Building off that famous old phrase, the medium is the message, Postman coined this idea that the medium is the metaphor. Basically, the medium we use to communicate acts as a metaphor for our entire culture. It actually decides what kind of messages can even exist in the first place. See, every tool we create has a built-in idea. A culture that communicates mostly through the printed word is going to have a vastly different standard for things like truth and intelligence compared to a culture that communicates mostly through moving pictures. The medium literally puts a limit on the types of ideas that can be expressed. To put this in perspective, in what Postman calls the age of typography, think early America, for example, public discourse was driven by logic, reasoned thought, and really complex arguments. You had to actively engage with the material. But then, as we shifted into the age of show business, dominated by television, wow, that primary focus shifted dramatically to images and emotions. Because honestly, you just can't broadcast complex logical arguments effectively on TV. The medium itself demands constant visual stimulation, which ultimately boils down deep, nuanced thought into these little 30-second sound bites. Just for a bit of historical context here, back in 1854, the Lincoln-Douglas political debates lasted for 7 continuous hours. 7 hours. That is a staggering testament to a print-based society that genuinely valued sustained, deep thought. Everyday people literally stood there, outside, for 7 whole hours, listening to multi-layered political arguments. They were processing spoken language basically the same way they'd read a dense book. Could you even imagine a modern audience doing that today? No way. Our brains have been completely rewired by rapid-fire visual media. We just don't have the patience or the stamina for that kind of sustained intellectual heavy lifting anymore. So, when television finally took over as the dominant medium, the cultural shockwaves were absolutely sweeping. Basically, every serious institution in society had to completely contort itself to fit the new rules of the screen. Because TV is inherently this passive, visual medium, it absolutely cannot tolerate boredom. It demands a spectacle, right? So, the evening news suddenly requires dramatic theme music and flashy graphics just to hold our attention. Religion loses its profound spiritual depth because televangelists have to prioritize lavish sets and charismatic performances over deep theology. In education, well, it starts to mimic variety shows. That sends a really dangerous message to students. If learning isn't highly amusing, it just isn't worth doing. Literally everything, from the church to the classroom, became show business. We actually see this incredibly clearly in politics. Now, strictly looking at Postman's theory here, it shows that a visual medium inherently requires leaders to be engaging entertainers. It doesn't matter where they fall on the political spectrum. Whether we're talking about Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, or Bernie Sanders, modern political survival requires mastering the spectacle. We're looking purely objectively at the mechanics of modern media here. political campaigns become way less about nuanced 100-page policy papers and way more about who has the most charismatic screen presence, the sharpest one-liners, and the most engaging overall image. And it gets deeper. Even beloved, super well-intentioned programming conditioned us to expect education to be a highly produced spectacle. Postman actually notoriously challenged the value of educational television. He pointed out this stark irony that a show like Sesame Street doesn't actually teach kids to love learning. It teaches them to love television. Think about it. When children go from flashy dancing puppets on a screen to a quiet, regular classroom where they actually have to sit still and struggle through a complex text, they are immediately bored and disengaged. This constant, unyielding need for visual stimulation created what Postman famously called the peekaboo world. It's like a world where a news event pops into view for a fleeting second, demands your absolute undivided attention, and then just vanishes instantly to make room for the next shiny thing. It's a reality with no coherence, no history, and really no context, just endless flashing stimulation. Television news relies heavily on this disjointed, now this format. Think about how a standard broadcast works, okay? You hear a tragic, deeply moving story about an earthquake. Then the anchor looks straight at the camera, says, now this, and suddenly, boom, you're watching a bright, upbeat commercial for a cheeseburger. That fragmentation completely strips the tragedy of all its gravity and meaning. It delivers a stream of what Postman defines as disinformation. We walk away feeling informed because, hey, we saw the images, but we're actually just consuming superficial trivia that creates the mere illusion of knowing. Now, you might be thinking this is all very 1980s, but this theory didn't die out back then. Scholars like Lance Straight have updated Postman's work to explain our current Web 2.0 reality. If television was a distraction, well, the internet and smartphones are a full-blown addiction. They've fundamentally altered our media ecology all over again. Straight argues that social media platforms haven't saved our public discourse at all. In fact, they actually supercharge the exact same biases Postman was warning us about. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, they definitely don't foster careful explanation or logical debate. They place this massive premium on the immediate, the novel, and the now. We've developed this extreme impatience with delay. We basically trade the deep, analytical reading required for actual logic for instant, highly emotional reactions to whatever happens to flash across our curated feeds. So, if television was the precursor to our distraction, the smartphone is the absolute ultimate realization of Aldous Huxley's nightmare. Actually, researchers recently drew a direct line between our modern smartphone usage and soma, that pacifying, distraction-inducing drug from Brave New World. In Huxley's novel, citizens eagerly took soma to instantly cure any feelings of sadness, boredom, or stress. It kept them totally docile and easily controlled. Sound familiar? Today, the second we feel a tiny twinge of anxiety or even just a moment of boredom waiting in line at the grocery store, what do? We reach right into our pockets. Our smartphones provide that exact same instant, pacifying hit of dopamine. And this constant digital pacification is doing real damage. It erodes our critical thinking skills and severely compromises our individuality. We are constantly being fed algorithmic feeds designed by experts who know exactly how to mold public taste and keep us absolutely hooked. We're sacrificing our personal autonomy, not to some dictator with a gun, but to a glowing rectangle that we voluntarily stare into for hours on end, guided by algorithms that know perfectly how to keep us scrolling. As Postman warned, ignorance is manageable, right? You can always teach someone who doesn't know something. But what do we do if we take ignorance to be knowledge? If we actually start believing that watching a fragmented, 3-minute, totally context-free video constitutes deep understanding of a really complex issue, how do you even correct that? If a society has been conditioned by its media to blindly accept trivial entertainment as actual knowledge, we are in serious, serious trouble. So, what does this all mean for us? Well, understanding exactly how our media shapes our reality is the very first step toward reclaiming our minds. We need to be fiercely critical of the formats that feed us information. We have to actively protect our ability to think deeply, read seriously, and engage logically. We really have to ask ourselves, are we going to use technology wisely to retain our humanity and engage with the world thoughtfully, or will we simply surrender to the screen and willingly scroll and amuse ourselves to death? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning what's on your screen.